it's a good afternoon or good morning, depending on what time it is for yourselves. Today's our trade newsletter we're going to be doing. An interesting one today, and a couple of areas I wanted to really discuss and kind of get an understanding because it's a real lot of confusion around origins, etc. When we hear a lot of trade news, but just give you a little bit of a history, and really just give you an understanding of it's nothing new. This phenomenon where you're hearing about Trump tariffs and everything else has been around forever. I wish sometimes when I was doing my history lessons at history, when I had Mr. Gould, I think he was called, God, he was boring. He used to fall asleep when he was, teaching things. I mean, these things I think would really excite a younger generation in trade. And it's really disappointing when you don't see, because there's lots of things out there that can interest us. I'm saying that you might be bored to tears when you learn about the history. But anyway, we're going to have a look at today's trade newsletter, and we're going to cover topics every time we do the newsletter. One today we're going to be covering is, the trade risk of 5,000 years ago. I covered this quite a lot, and obviously as a level 4 now diploma which I created, which is now just got Ofqual approved, which should, once we've got everything in place, should start. We'll probably launch it properly in March, end of March, around there. So please, if you enjoy a bit of training, but you don't like that intensity of somebody talking and not really having the knowledge, this is different. It's delivered by myself. I've had about, we originally created it as an endorsed, and we've had about 10 people going through the endorsed and really, really interaction, really enjoyed it. Really, if you want to move up the ladder in global trade and in supply chain, the level 4 diploma is really, really well teach it. It teaches every part of trade. I've been training, I've done over 1,000 courses. I know it works, I know it doesn't work, and I know what companies need. So when I designed that, I made sure I covered all the key topics in international trade, whether you're importing or exporting. So please, feel free to have a look at it. What's today telling us? Obviously from your newsletter, what challenges are we seeing? Global trade is being fundamentally reshaped. We know that. We know now EU, I'm going to talk a lot about the CBAM going forward. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's something that you have to be aware of. You've got UK, I nearly said that. US trade policy remains unpredictable. There's lots of challenges within there, and you've seen that geopolitical with Greenland and other things around there. It has an effect. It does have an effect. Or, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, and please don't take my opinion as gospel, it creates a lot of opportunity. CBAM, delays, it creates opportunity, it creates price increases, and this is why be ahead of the game. And by doing and watching the YouTube video, hopefully it'll help you there. I'm not convinced that all these price increases are warranted, but it's not for me to say, but it's just my many years of being in this industry, over 30 years. What constitutes something going up in price? Oh, there's geopolitical thing. Well, how's Greenland affect a shipping line? Where does that take it? So, there's lots of things around there. There'll be a lot of disagreements within that, who are probably sitting watching this and, well, I disagree, Richard, that's fine. Everybody has an opinion. That's just my take on it. I believe you can control your prices, but you just need to know where to look and how to control it. And there's lots of things you can do within that. Lots of companies waste money, trust me. My experience of doing, and this is all live experience, going and doing audits and diagnostics and sitting with customers, sitting all day, and just fundamentally they've given it to, they're a small office, they're not particularly a big office, so poor person in admin or even sometimes on reception gets that pure intensity of expecting to get everything right, and they're not even trained. And sometimes, it's a worry that things happen and mistakes, and then when it does happen, unfortunately, there's a blame game, and it shouldn't be like that. It's about training people, and like I talked about yesterday, get them salespeople trained up. They are your future. They will drive your business forward. There's no question about that. We're seeing product categories managed to survive the demand in variable proof. So origin is coming really into, it's always been there, but I would think in the last probably few years, we're seeing a huge challenge with origin. Obviously, Brexit forced the UK to look at different things, and the UK have tried to adapt as best they can. Not fully, but they've tried to adapt the best they can, and they've tried to get trade deals out there. I remember in the old government, Kim, who's now obviously in charge of Conservative. Actually, I thought she did a great job. You know, I'm very critical, as you know, with governments and everything, but I actually thought she had it spot on. She was starting to make real inroads, and I thought it was always a shame when we had the changes. But obviously, you know, I'm not into politics in that kind of way where I look too deep into things. But I felt she did a really good job, and she was really starting to get. You know, would the US trade deal been different with Kimmy in charge or Kimmy, you know, guiding that? I think 100% personally. You know, if I'm giving anybody any players, I would have said that she could have got a good deal. I'm not saying we've done anything wrong in this side, but it's that experience. And I thought that was an area where I think she thrived on. Obviously, you know, she's gone on to better things now. But yeah, it's always challenging. We've got carbon border adjustment, all these kind of things that are coming in. They're going to be challenges anyway. So we're going to talk a little bit about Origin today. Intelligence signals telling us buyer consolidation. We've already talked about that. We're seeing that more and more. Our intelligence is telling us buyers are being consolidated. They're starting to consolidate. They're starting to shift. They're starting to look at pricing. We're seeing that real movement now. We never really saw it before, but we're starting to see that. You know, incorrect origin, you know, declarations, proper customs valuations. You know, we talk about it every day, but it's coming more and more. We're seeing more and more challenge, more and more phone calls from customers, more and more challenges at borders, more and more challenges in the US. And again, it's a minefield. It really is. So, you know, you're not here to be experts on customs or anything, but you're just here to kind of get an understanding of how where you think about your risk. If you think you've got origin, I'm going to explain this in a minute. That's fine. Nobody's here to question you. It's just you've got to have the evidence to back that up, and I'll explain that as we go along today. Why this matters, CBAM, US trade dependency, and enforcement trend. We're seeing German and the wider European Union courts are consistently supporting stricter customs. I see this every day. I see German customs being challenging with a lot of products going in there. You can send the products into Spain, and you can send the same products into Germany and be stuck at border. You know, Germany have huge challenges themselves, same as the UK and every country I assume when it comes to customs. You know, they don't have, you know, there's so much customs now when you think of e-commerce and everything else, there's so many changes. It's very hard to keep on top of that, and they can only do what they can do. But if they don't see something and you've not done your customs correctly or your paperwork, they're going to question it. So again, it's that evidence and that proof. Like I said, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail when we talk about the history of trade. The reason I want to do this, it's something I enjoy. Don't ask me why, because I hated history as a kid. But as you get older, you start to read more or listen more. I tend to listen more. I tend to look on different things and see about trade. You know, it's part of my life, and obviously building AI and building courses and delivering courses. I have to be in the know all the time. It's very important. I'm very fortunate within the freight forwarding because obviously as the EPA, I'm assessing, you know, your upcoming apprenticeships who, and some of them are absolutely fantastic. I'm understanding exactly the challenges and everything they're going through. So I'm on it. I'm fully up to speed with a lot of things, which is good. But the history of trade is nothing new. And it always surprises me when we talk about the history of trade. You know, if we think about the Silk Road over 2,000 years ago, you know, it was set up to move and start to move transport. And they moved it, obviously, as you can imagine, with camels and everything else. And then it evolved over the years. But there were ways that they would, you know, manipulate things. And there were ways, and I've done a 20 course video on the actual full history of trade, which we will put on the YouTube. And it's really interesting to see, but I just thought today we'll just go through a few things. And I've just put on here, each border crossing merchants face taxation. If you think about the Roman days, I mean, you know, this is always surprising. You know, to enter into, you know, into Rome and into other areas, you paid a tax. You paid a duty tax. You know, it even came down to certain areas. It's never confirmed whether slaves, if you're bringing slaves in, you'd have to pay a tax on that. So anything you brought in, silk or anything you brought in, that, you know, they wanted a tax on that. So this is nothing new. You know, don't be bombarded to think, oh, what Trump's doing and everything. This has been around for years, and countries have used it to their advantage. And in some cases, they've created things that should never have been created. So again, you know, origins and wars and everything else, they all have a meaning. You know, origin manipulation has been around. Some great stories on it. So when we talk about it, why in the 1600s, 1700s there were smugglers, obviously, but actually Rome were quite clever with this. They actually looked at they were producing wines. And what they would do, they would go and get the wine from Spain and other parts of Europe or other parts of the world, bring it and decantonize it and put it into their own things where it felt like it was their own products. And it was a way of like of that perceived quality and also keeping duties at bay. What did China do? China have been very clever and China have been doing this for years. Never underestimate the quality and the intelligence of other countries when it comes to technology and to doing things and how you can maneuver things. You know, even in the old days, the European empires established distinct tariff schedules based on origin, British, French, Dutch, Spanish. So you moved around that. Even to think that China would move things into Egypt and move it other ways, so they would move things, do something to it. You know, is this ringing a bell? You know, you're doing so, you're processing kind of, and then you're moving it, and you're moving it from one origin to another. You know, it was around, it's been around forever. It's just that you now have a paper trail or traceability. In them days, there wasn't. Again, smugglers changed origin declarations, spoke tariff differentials. Governments lose billions. So we've seen that. You know, there's no question over the history of years gone by. What other things would happen if you looked at trade? It was a way of manipulating how you could move your goods and keep that cost as more competitive as you could. You know, it's all about selling, isn't it? Selling, buying. It doesn't change. So 1600s, European empires established distinct tariffs. 1700s, colonial trade expands. Imperial preference systems grant lower duties to goods from colonies. So what would you do? You'd move it to a colony and then from a colony. You know, there wasn't that, you know, there wasn't digital systems in place that you could check things. And, you know, origin fraud has gone on for years and it's been the biggest challenge for countries. So what you see now, which we'll talk about in a minute, is nothing different to what's gone on for years, but it's just a little bit easier, I would say, to start doing the traceability because now we have computers, we have other things. But from 1600s and 1900s, emperors implemented increased sophisticated custom systems, but origin fraud remained academics. The technology is verified true origin simply does not exist. In commercial incentives to misrepresent origin were overwhelming. So it was difficult to then prove. How do you prove it? And that's why now when we start talking about technology, there's more of that proof. So again, you might think your goods are an origin when people keep saying your goods are origin, and you would say, if you know, my goods are definitely of a UK origin. We bring it in, we do things to it, and we say, oh, but what are you doing to it? You know, are you fundamentally changing something on that product? If you're not changing anything, and the vast majority of that product is the origin from the country it's gone to, you're not really changing it. What you could be doing is that made. So you're combining everything together and putting things together. That's slightly different than origin. It's made. So you see that made in the UK, and then you see goods coming in where it's an origin. Where's the benefit of having origin? If you think about Brexit and the UK, the huge challenges the UK put exporters in. They didn't care about exporters. They looked after imports to make sure import goods were coming in because they knew that if goods weren't on the shelves or anything else, there'd be a lot of pressure on a lot of businesses and a lot of pressure from the consumer. And then what happens? People start screaming and shouting. But exporters, they didn't give you hoops because they didn't understand the market. So what happened is we had this real imbalance. So an exporter in Europe could export his goods into the UK. He could say the goods are a European origin. What checks were done? Nothing. It came into the UK for the first probably 2 years, and then the UK introduced the REX system. So the REX is a very similar to, it's kind of an origin. It's an origin statement that's a registered exporter. That means that somebody in their country has approved that the goods meet that criteria. But in them early stages, that wasn't happening. And what may have happened is that you've been importing goods thinking it's a European origin when it may not have been. What happens? You have an audit, customs go through 2021, 2022. You've got this, you know, the customer told us that it was an origin of the EU. Customs here in the UK will say, we'll prove it. You've got no traceability, no supplies declaration, no REX numbers. You've got nothing. What happens is, unless you can prove it, then you end up paying the duty. So for 2 years, we had this real imbalance, and it's a real challenge for you. So I do feel for a lot of companies who are in that manufacturing and also importing, because you're only going off what you've been told by your supplier. If your supplier hasn't told you the correct information, because again, this has been going on for years, it's nothing new. Why would I tell a customer that this product I bought from China and I'm sending it to you? Why would I tell you when there could be a 4% duty charge in it? Now, if you think the UK did a lot of things, they actually reduced a lot of the duties in the early stages to help importers. But again, if you're misrepresenting that, there's always a possibility that you could get fined from HMRC. But yeah, if you're a customer, why would you? So you think on the flip side, I'm an exporter in the UK. I'm allowed to put a statement on. There's no origin certificates from the Chamber of Commerce. I'm literally just saying that these goods meet that criteria. So what happens then when there's an audit in Europe? And they're getting very strict with this now in Spain, Italy, and they say, oh, Germany, particularly Germany, can you prove these goods of a UK origin? The customer says, well, customer in the UK has told me, you know, are you confident that when HMRC contact you, that them goods of a UK origin? So it's very important to understand you've got to have that traceability. If you're bringing goods in from China and all over on your raw materials, or you're bringing in wholesale, you're not changing anything. So that wholesale origin stays the same. Yeah, but Richard, I buy it from the company they're based in the UK. And well, they're based in the UK, so it's an origin of the UK. No, unless they're making that product, unless they're doing something to that product and they're actually manufacturing it and they've changed it to a UK origin, it might not be UK origin. They might be importing it from another country and then giving it to you. That doesn't constitute that it's a UK origin. It's where the physical goods have been made, where the origination started from. Now, it could be that it started somewhere, but it's been changed in the process. That's fine, because that's an origin change. And as you've seen with smuggling and everything else that's gone on over the years, tariff schedules are coming, trade agreements, rules of origin. It gets more complex now, the WTO. Um, you know, it's a huge job for them to kind of control. But from a compliance point, there's so many rules now involved. But if I'm an exporter in 2000 and Brexit, I've been told 3 days before that there's a trade deal in place, and I'm not sure myself whether my goods are a UK origin. I make some of it, I import some of it, some I import and I send out, some I manufacture. Why am I going to suddenly think, well, my customers are going to pay 4% duty or 5% duty? There's a part of me thinking, well, does that make me competitive? Because I know what your sales guys said, well, hang on a minute, we're going to lose potentially customers here, because we're going to, not only have we got paperwork involved and they've got to do an import duty on that, and they've got to pay VAT. And remember, VAT in Europe, they had to pay up front. So there wasn't this PVA and deferment that we have here in the UK. Yes, Ireland was slightly different, but in Europe, they had to pay the VAT up front. You imagine then having to charge them duty. That's where DDP was born. DDP's been around forever, and I'm going to talk about DDP, but it was born because a lot of European distributors or customers couldn't afford to pay all the taxes up front. Hence, what do you do? Are you going to charge them 4% on top of that? Are you going to try and say that it's a UK origin? What happens then? The traceability comes back to you when there's an audit, and you've got to be able to purely confirm that your traceability, that your product is manufactured and made, that it becomes a UK origin. That's the difficult. I'm not saying any of you are doing anything wrong or anything. I think there's a lot of pressure, but this is where we see a lot of changes within history. It's not anything different. Countries have abused it. Trump, we've seen it very loudly with Trump. And so there's two big challenges within the history of trade when we talk about origin. It's been around, as you've seen, and we do it more detailed. One is Trump tariffs. He wants to know exactly where that sourceability is. China, how did it become the powerhouse? Because we allowed China to grow like it did, because we wanted cheaper products. We decided as countries that we wanted to import cheaper because of consumer demand. The UK is a huge importer, the fifth global player in the world of importing goods. So we need to then find ways of importing the goods cheaply. What do? We go to places like China, we use the system, we educate them, and then what happens? It becomes a powerhouse. And then we complain. Oh, well, China's too big now. And well, actually, come on, we've created that because we didn't invest in our own countries to build, because we've got all different rules and regulations. I remember in the 80s very clearly, or 70s when I was growing up, all my family, my brothers was a supervisor, Michael, and my dad actually worked at Senford. how he worked with my dad is beyond me. Um, but working in the same, and they was one of the thriving businesses in the UK. There was a lighting business, and he started to see, and I remember it growing up. He used to say, "God, there's all this stuff coming over now from China, and it's cheap crap products." Excuse the language. It's cheap rubbish product that looks dangerous to me. Yet we have a product, and we have to go through all British standards and regulations and everything else to be able to sell that product on the market. Yeah, you can bring this product to us and sell it on the open market half the price that we can do it at. And I was always intrigued with that. I thought, how does that work? And then you've seen it. So what happens is the manufacturing site went from 500 people to around 50 people now because it can't compete. So what it does, it starts buying the stuff from China. But yeah, they had the whole factory and everything in place, and it was a booming time. But what did we do? We decided to go for that cheaper products because in the UK we brought lots of legislation and other things in and regularities, which is great, but then have the same for the goods coming into the UK. And that was always the imbalance. So as an imbalance, as an exporter, you've got the huge challenges because when you're sending your goods out, Europe, they want to know exactly where them goods are from. They want to know exactly the origin because if they're not collecting any duties, there's no import of income coming in. Look at what's happening in the US. Use your prime example. Anybody in trade understands how it works. He knew that if he started to charge customs while he's the big player, international player, US will not collapse. It will carry on being number one and number two, competing with China. And they don't like what China has achieved or Trump. We've created that. You're not going to change it. But what he started to do, he started to manipulate the tariffs. He started to say, well, actually, you tell me where them goods are coming from. And why, when I'm sending my goods from the US into them countries, I'm getting charged tax. He misunderstood VAT and taxes because he doesn't realise, or he didn't realise that. You can claim that back. But duties, he was saying, well, why am I paying a dutiful charge on, say, cars going into Europe, yet you can send the same car into the US and not pay any duties? How's that? And it's an imbalance. So he started to put tariffs a bit extreme, but he started to put all tariffs on there. Whether you agree or disagree, it's not for me. I'm not here to disagree or agree. I'm just explaining how it works. He's generated an imbalance. So we've got a huge imbalance. He started to bring that balance up because he's generating huge amounts of money. And what do you do with that money? It's pure money. You either spend it in infrastructure into the US or you do whatever. But it's rolling in money, and then they put stricter controls on into the US, so it's traceability. EU. So EU are banging on the door saying, well, what US has done is appalling, it's not right, and everything else. And they've done the same thing. They've introduced CBAM. So they've done exactly the same thing. They've created a market, what was beneficial to the EU from China and other countries, India and cheaper products coming in under the GSP. And then on the second part, they've said, well, actually, we need to now control this because we want to, the buzzword, we want to be net zero or carbon zero. So we're going to introduce a new system, and it's a tax. That's all it is. It's a tax under origin. You need to start proving your origin, your goods, your traceability, where all them goods are coming from, because they want to make sure that goods that are arriving into the EU are meeting a certain criteria. Otherwise, you'll pay a tax on it. So you've got CBAM, you've got US tariffs, and there'll be something else coming. And it's all to do with origin wars. That's how it works. And unfortunately, somebody on the other side has to pay it. So what do we have to do? We have to be very clear in controlling what we're doing. And as I've said, China and globalization becomes world's patria. Manufacturing consolidates in China. Western nations implement protective tariffs targeted Chinese origin goods. What did China do? They've done it. They're absolutely, I would say, mustard is the old saying. If you smile at yourself with some of my sayings, but they've very clever with how they do it. So what do? They just start moving goods by different places, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Mexico. They start shifting the processing. They do a minor processing. They shift it. They'll be way ahead of the game. So, lots of countries can demand things. You're never going to stop China. China is the powerhouse and it will stay the powerhouse. You're not going to change. And they'll find ways to get the goods. Yes, they may be under pressure, but they'll find ways of moving goods to everywhere. Because why would somebody in the UK stop buying from China? There's no reason. If you're getting it so cheap, how can you then compete to get it any cheaper? So there'll always be ways around that. The UK has adopted a very simple system that goods can enter the UK more or less zero tariffs now. But again, I never understand the logic where you're trying to create money. You know, if anybody ever looks at what Trump's done, is a perfect example that increase your trade tariffs by a couple of percent, and you've got a huge income coming in. Fifth global play in the UK. You know, there are lots of ways you can do things, but also you can stop an influx of goods coming in, and that's where the challenge is. Where you hear about things like countervailing, you hear things like anti-dumping, you know, quotas. They're all put in because it stops the amount of goods entering the country and flooding the market. And again, we're going to do a little talk on that. The subtle strategy now is through global logistics, change the level, reduce the time. You can change things. It happens, it works. Lots of people do it. And I'm under no illusion that the UK has also adapted that within Brexit because a lot of companies didn't have choices. They were needed to stay competitive. And as they got used to understanding the market, they started to adapt new policies and new products. They started to source from other places. I remember many years ago going seeing a customer who was, I think there was in workwear, and they was buying products from Albania, and they were bringing in stuff in when it was going by Italy, and they was getting charged 12%. And he said that can't be right. He said the carrier's done this wrong. The charge was 12%. And I said, yeah, because Albania's gone into Italy. It's where the physical goods are being shipped from. So Albania, you may have a trader, but you're not shipping, you're shipping it via Italy. Italy then is sending the goods to you. There's no Rex or anything because the goods are actually originated from somewhere else. So you're paying third country duty, 12%, you know, and that was potentially a huge cost to them. So we had to quickly work out which were the best trade routes to use and could we bring it in directly from Albania under the Mediterranean deal. So again, look at your trade deals. They're there. They're very difficult to understand at times. Even I look at them and think I lose the will to live. But again, use the people. Trump's tariff enforcement explosion, you know, 370 billion US imports from China, estimated tariff avoidance, 150 billion increase in US customs audits. You know, we're seeing that, and we'll have Angela on, our friend, customs incredible expert, works for an intelligence company in Clare now over there. What she doesn't know about US tariffs, she's going to be coming on and doing a little update, probably once a week on us on our YouTube channel, just to give us an update to what's happening in the US and the things to look out for. But we're seeing that the market response channels were systematically relabeled, rerouted. People will do things to move goods. Not every container gets stopped. Always remember that. But always remember, if you're doing this, there's always that chance you get stopped. If you get stopped, you know, and you haven't got that traceability, this is why your documents, your compliance and everything is so important. It really is. CBAM, manufacturing location, where were the goods actually produced, which facilities, which process. Again, you know, it's nothing new. It's another form of a taxation. It changes the game. What's CBAM? Carbon Border Adjustment, everybody. It's here. It will roll out, trust me. They'll get giddy with this and they'll roll it out. You cannot hide carbon emissions by changing shipping routes or relabeling. CBAM requires a very technical data, so there's a lot of things you can't hide. And that's the difference with evolving years. What we was doing in the 5,000 years ago and over the years, and since then there's always a way they'll find a loophole. Like for instance with Brexit, with the where we used the regime 4042, it allowed goods to be cleared at one central point in France and then delivered directly to customers. You know, there's always loopholes that will be found, and there'll always be loopholes where there's costs involved or where there's a challenge to any customer. So yes, CBAM will generate income, but it'll start creating a lot of false declarations because customers will not want to be hit with extra costs, or ultimately you don't want the buyer moving somewhere else. It puts a lot of pressure on the buyer in Europe, but don't be in that situation again. Look at your carbon. You know, they're bringing it in. There'll be certain products on there, but trust me, once they get advantage, they'll put it on everything. There's no question about that. And if anybody says, oh no, they will. You know, it's a form of taxation. It's a great way of taxing and getting money coming in. Why Origin now decides everything. Origin is the most critical part of your business. You have to check if you're exporting goods or if you're importing goods and then you're distributing it to suppliers who are exporting it. You have to know the traceability of the origin. You need to understand where the origin supplies declarations. Um, uh, you know, it's very important to look at your suppliers declarations, your X numbers, long-term suppliers declarations. I'm going to do a few little snippets on these just so people know what they are. Preference, non-preference, what do they all mean? So origin has evolved. There's no question about that. and it's more volatile than it's ever been. And we're now starting to see an uprise in taxes, carbon taxes, trade tariffs within the US. There'll be retaliation with other countries on that. And what happens is the UK sat in that as a huge consumer. It then puts huge pressure on you as an exporter on understanding what's coming and what's not coming. So again, it's just understanding and making sure that you're ahead of the game and just keeping on tabs and making sure you know exactly where to go and what to look out for. Again, why export unlocked exist? We're just here to just give you that bit of news. There's nothing I haven't done especially over the last 10 years, that I haven't, challenged and sorted and helped lots of businesses. Just, having a very relaxed, I'm not here to fight anybody. I'm here to say it's here, but I'm here to say we can support you, we can help you. If you've been doing things wrong, that's fine. That's life. We understand why people, we all do things that maybe we shouldn't have done. When I was selling, I used to drive my partner, Nick, absolutely insane when we used to go and do deals in Europe and around the world. I'd be like, yeah, I can do that. And I always remember Nick would go, well, how can we do that? And I said, oh, just get on with it. And that's always the challenge, isn't it? You're under pressure to get increased sales. So again, have a think about that. We created the customs diagnostics. It's 395 quid. It's going to be the best investment you could ever make. Honestly, it gives you so much information. You can download checklists, you can do all sorts. It'll give you a full report. It'll tell you exactly where you're up to and the places to think about. It'll give you your strategy as well. And it's 395 quid. If you go to the 995, you get a procedure manual. You get all sorts within, you get videos and everything. The great investments, just try it. It takes you 20, 25 minutes. It's up to you. But it's only good for the information you put in. It's no good if you don't, put the correct answers in or if you fudge it. Then I'm not telling them that. That's the whole point. It's your report. It's not ours. It's your report. We don't get involved with it. You get that report. We've spent hours and hours and probably months and months creating that checklist. It was created by myself, Tom, my good friend Tom, who was head of Irish Customs, Humphrey, who was very much in the manufacturing, really knowledgeable people. We spent a lot of time getting these questions, and then we built it in to start to understand what the answers could give you. So we built that because we knew you needed to have answers from it. So it's not somebody who's just, somebody you see on these technology, yeah, we do this. And then you ask them a question. Well, how does it create that? They can't answer you. We can answer any of the questions you want to put on there because we created it. I created it from scratch. It took me 3 years to create it. And it's certainly worth the investment, everybody. All I can say, please inquire. It's all on there. Again, I hope you enjoyed it. It's gone a little bit long because I just want to go through that origin, the importance of origin. It's playing a huge impact on trade. It really is. Be ahead of the game. Don't wait. If you're doing things wrong, that's fine. Things happen. Let's rectify that. Let's get things in place so we can look at what the impact could have been and what the impact is going to be going forward. And we'll get compliance and procedures in place. You'll actually increase trade. It'll give your sales guys the confidence to go out and sell more. The UK is in a great position. We're still very well known around the world with trade. I've worked in Saudi, Qatar, in Europe, Lithuania. The UK is still renowned as a quality product, so don't ever underestimate that. It's very important. So thanks for today. Hope you've enjoyed that, and please put some comments on there. Good or bad, it's up to you. It's not for us to stop you doing. But this is more just keeping you in the loop and making sure that you've got everything that you need for you to create and go forward. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.